Emily, what's on your radar this morning?
Well, I'd introduce you to the new CONTRAs, but you already know them. Andrew Schultz, Michael Malice, Katie Halper, Katie Herzog, and of course, Joe Rogan, and many more. This show itself has been a huge driving force between the, quote, new CONTRA movement Federalist publisher Ben Domenech and I sought to describe in an article we published on Election Day last year. Now, in December, we wrote a follow-up inspired by a telling set of parallel departures over at Vox. Ezra Klein went to the Gray Lady, Matthew Iglesias went to Substack. Quote, in corporate media, heterodox thought is rewarded with closed doors, we wrote. In the Wild West of today's new media, it's rewarded with subscriptions. While it may sound laughable that Klein and Iglesias will enjoy similar levels of influence, one at the paper of record and the other at an independent newsletter, it's mostly true. And that's a blind spot legacy outlets still haven't corrected. But those outlets actually have little incentive to correct their blind spots in this splintered media economy, where Stephen Colbert can be both the most polarizing and the most successful late-night host, and papers like the New York Times can retract anodyne op-eds from Republican senators for violating thought crimes and actually please their readership. We're all in niches now. So the currency is trust. For polarized media consumers, that means listening to talk radio or reading the Times. For everyone in between, trust is increasingly boosting voices that prize authenticity over gloss. The gatekeepers are gone or they're corrupt. Nobody knows who to trust, and for good reason. So people who level with us about that are doing well. That's what happened with Rising. It's why I'm a longtime viewer, and like many of you, and it's why I've been working 3 jobs for the past few weeks, dragging myself out of bed too early, despite being the most anti-morning person ever, also the most anti-hair and makeup person ever. But this show is really part of something important. Just last week, Ryan Grimm and I went a little bit viral for sparring over the legacy of American imperialism. We didn't mean to. We were just talking, covering the news as we had done all week. We were actually amused by the strong reaction. I think it revealed something really interesting and perhaps impossible about the political realignment, with one side's motivation moored in a reverence for the country historically, and the others in a genuine good faith disdain for a lot of the country's legacy. That's a disconnect that's best exposed and explored through good faith debate. But this is exactly the point. Jon Stewart's legendary death blow to Crossfire wasn't as great as the corporate press likes to remember. It's good to see representative political debate in the media. In its absence, something quite ugly can develop. So enter Jeff Bezos. On Wednesday, quote, on Wednesday, Jeff Bezos announced a career accomplishment that the movie arch-villain Ernst Stavro Blofeld could only dream about: owning James Bond. Rachel Bovard, friend of the show, wrote in The Federalist. Her headline was brilliant. There's no James Bond to stop Jeff Bezos from increasing his global power. With his empty expressions and robotic cadence, Bezos really is the perfect Bond villain, right out of Central Casting. He's a Bond villain who's now in charge of the Bond villains. Quote, the question of market economics, however, is separate from the cultural consequences of Amazon taking ownership of yet another avenue of expression in America, Rachel wrote. She then walked through a list of egregious efforts on Amazon's behalf to preserve a cultural monopoly, yanking a totally inoffensive documentary about Clarence Thomas during Black History Month, deplatforming Parler like it had deplatformed WikiLeaks, stopping sales of books that question the excesses of transgender ideology on children. Think what you want about Clarence Thomas or Parler or Ryan Anderson. What's troubling is that executives at one of the biggest platforms for retail and web hosting and everything else believe their bar for company censorship should be that low, despite their market share being so high. Here's more from Rachel. America's rich speech traditions are built around robust dissent, counter-narrative, and the clanging clash of ideas in the public square, she wrote. Free expression is central to our flourishing. Americans want our books to be controversial, our media to be curious, and our films to be creative. But the genius of that creation is sparked by fearlessness, the kind which only exists when the public square is brimming with voices, rather than the antiseptic sameness of a solely owned company town. There is no way I could have said it better than that. And it's what America's monopolists don't understand about the public. Their cultural monopolies are powerful, but perhaps not as powerful as their economic ones, connected as they are. Demand for heterodox thought and charged debate is increasing as monopolists like Bezos, who also, by the way, owns the Washington Post, try to bring the public discourse under their control. Culture is what creates demand. These companies control the biggest podcasting platforms, web services, video streamers, etc., etc., etc. But as Andrew Schultz told us late last year, all these corporations act all woke, but what they really want is the dollar. His Netflix show debuted a few weeks later. None of this is to say today's monopolists don't warrant regulatory checks. True conservatism should be as hostile to cronyism as progressivism is. But sometimes it is. So, Colin, Amazon taking control of MGM is what the context for all of this is. And MGM is what owns James Bond. They have the intellectual property of James Bond. Jeff Bezos, the Bond villain himself, swooping in to exert more control over MGM. This is an important kind of question because we've already seen Hollywood check itself in the interest of placating the Chinese movie market and the Chinese censors who do actually control through my reporting. I've explored this a lot. A lot of people in Hollywood self-censor, or then they'll censor their scripts when the CCP asks them to, including Bohemian Rhapsody. They took parts about Freddie Mercury's history as a gay man out of that to placate the CCP and to make more money in China. Now, when Jeff Bezos comes in and says he's going to take over MGM, and his companies have already shown this willingness to tighten the strictures on debate and to narrow those boundaries of free expression, what do you think about Bezos swooping into the creative sphere and taking over a movie company? I mean, you're a creative guy.
Yeah, look, and I'm a movie guy, right? Like that, my training is in direction, right? This is what I studied. It's what I've been doing really my entire life now, and it's incredibly sad, first of all, right, to see studios taken over by these large corporations that aren't there specifically. You know, they are there for what you said, which is to chase the dollar. They're not there specifically because they care and want to foster the art and dissent and thought. But I think in what you wrote, which was brilliant, by the way, is a question which is, or was a quote, which is, what is the public square now? Yeah. This is what we have to ask ourselves.
Perfect point.
Because it was, at one point in time, you know, dominated by a few media channels, right? We've seen a large diversification of that. I have to say, I think we're in a big transitionary period. And I ultimately think that rebellious streak, right, that desire to have this public dissent and public conversation from a place of authenticity also holds, creatively speaking, also holds in the movie industry and also holds television, et cetera, even though our streamers are becoming behemoths themselves and studios are being consolidated and venture capitals in it. And a whole, you know, we could do a separate show on that.
Absolutely. And maybe
the
we
CCP
can talk
checks,
tomorrow.
we definitely should. But I have a lot of faith in one thing, and it's that art is based on a rebellion against something that is presently exists.
Yes.
Okay. And so as these things become larger and more, sanitized, as you said, the real art is going to come out of rebellion to that, like podcasts, like this show, like places where there's space for people to have a real debate, and that feeds this kind of desire that Americans have to hear it, to go against the system and question the system, because I think that's fundamentally who we are.
Right.
And now that things are democratizing, and especially in the film industry, you used to need millions and millions and millions of dollars to make any kind of film. Right now, the technology has created an open door for filmmakers who want to say something to create it at a much more cost-effective level than they have before. So that's just using that film industry as a way to, as an example to how artists and creatives and people who want to question the system or make their own art can do so. And podcasts are a perfect example. You need a microphone and a computer. And there you go, you got a voice.
Yeah.
Now it's up to you whether you can produce content that is worth viewing and people are actually going to listen to, but you have the opportunity to do it. So I still have faith that our rebellious nature ultimately will take us out of that. But media consolidation has been going on forever. I mean, like they've been buying up newspapers and television stations in markets for a long period of time, which I also think is not good for any of us.
No, you said something important, which is that you feel as though we're in a transition period, and I think that's absolutely accurate. I think the sort of best glass half full way to look at this is that we are caught up as the guinea pigs in a big adjustment from mass media to democratized, splintered, niche media, and that's totally happening. That's absolutely what's going on. Hopefully the spirit of America's artists hasn't been been deadened to the point where it's impossible to revive our rich culture of art in this country. And, another thing that makes me, have you seen the new Megan Thee Stallion video?
Yes, I have.
Of course, okay.
Controversial, but,
Controversial, but anyway, so the way that connects to what we're talking about here is that she has the senator, old white, presumably Republican senator, who's attacking her, but also getting off on her, we'll say. And it's like, who has talked like that about our artists since like Tipper Gore? It's such a straw man to me that, some senator would be talking about Megan Thee Stallion that way. It's not that there aren't still like Christian conservatives who talk about pop artists that way. Of course there are, but it's not like we don't live in the era of Tipper Gore anymore. But we kind of do on the one hand. Some of these cultural and economic monopolists do want to force their very narrow and restrictive ideology into the artistic sphere. We have seen that in Hollywood. We have seen that with book retailers. We have seen that time and again. And to me, that's the real concern, because as you said, another glass half full way to look at this is that the restrictions are going to help art flourish, because art flourishes when it's transgressive. And the more that you can put strictures onto artists, the more they're going to have that impulse to challenge them. And that challenge creates really beautiful art. And I think that a good way to look at this in the radar is about, shows like this, podcasts, how they have succeeded. It's because that demand exists, and because the new media infrastructure, Substack, all of these things is allowing people to free themselves from the confinement of corporate outlets and corporate control. And so that's good news. And I sort of like your optimism on this, Colin.
Look, as they say about art, the best art derives from pain. So let them keep trying to lay the pain on us, and we'll keep breaking out of it.
Bring it on. Team Rising is with us next.